Hello, and welcome to my very first podcast. Today I have with me Matthew.
Hello.
Today we're going to be talking about basically, my topic is just how do corrupt people gain supreme power over us? So, mainly, I'm thinking about like how Trump has kind of gone a little crazy with his power recently with sending ICE out, and I just have a lot of questions. But first, I just want to ask you, why are you into history and why are politics important to you?
I am interested in history because history is happening right now as we speak, and history has always happened. It is always a thing and it will continue to always be a thing. Same thing with politics, they go hand in hand. And that is what affects everything about all aspects of our lives, to how we eat, who we love, where we live, what we drink, the state of the air that we breathe. It controls all of that and it affects everything. History and politics are very important, and if you care about what goes on in your life, then it's very worth it to look into them and see how it affects your everyday.
That's really true. It's really important that more and more people start getting into politics because I feel like nobody really cares about them. It's just one of those subjects that nobody ever wants to talk about. Nobody really likes who's the president, I feel. At least that's just how I've seen things.
Yeah, definitely. You can definitely see a lot of political apathy lately, and people will generally agree with you on not liking certain politicians, but they may not seem as interested in actually understanding how the political process works or how they even got into that position in the first place.
So, my next question for you is, why should people care about history and politics?
People should care because it affects not only them, but their loved ones as well. So if they really care about the people that are in their family, they will be looking out not for their own best interest, but also their interest as well. Say, the women's right to vote. That really took a lot of support from both male and women suffragists, as well as, say, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That took a lot of political support from both black and white Americans from all across the aisle. And it took a lot of work to make that possible. And people would have to care about one another for that to actually happen. And it took decades of political movement building to even have that happen. And there are still things going on right now that we still need to work for and fight for, like even a higher minimum wage that would affect, say, any friend you might know or any loved one you might have that is really struggling to pay rent. There are a lot of specific political issues that you really have to pay attention to that can affect people around you, like even gay marriage that really only got legalized recently and within our lifetime. So, if you really cared about that issue, you have to stay up to date with it and how it is even allowed and what protects it and what can threaten it.
It's crazy to think about how, in our lifetime, like within 21 years or maybe more, gay marriage became more normalized. And it's just crazy to think about how it used to not be something that was just okay. Because I've always seen it as something that's just normal. Like in nature, you see gay animals all the time, but nobody ever talks about it because it makes them uncomfortable. I feel like the main problem we have is that people are just uncomfortable with talking about these things.
Very so.
Not to avoid talking about all of that, we gotta get a move on. So, my next question is, what are some divide and conquer strategies among dictators and why do they work?
Divide and conquer strategies mainly work because they will focus on sociological in groups versus out groups. They will focus on specific traits that people have and specific traits that set aside everyone else as different than them. And they will talk to you like they are in your group and that they are looking out for your and their best interest and pit you against anyone who may have a different trait or is in your sociological outgroup and say it is us versus them. It is either you or them. They will talk about it as they are taking away what should be yours. They are taking away, say, taking your jobs, taking your health care, taking your social security. Those are very common things that many demagogues use. And if you want to learn about, say, in the US, how divide and conquer strategies work, we have a very early roots with George Wallace in the 1950s when he started using coded language in states' rights to talk about the us versus them strategy. And that's where we see a very early divide and conquer strategy in America, which eventually led to the election of Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan.
Wow.
I would say some examples of divide and conquer strategies used in other countries would be Adolf Hitler, and his book Mein Kampf would describe how he viewed other people, especially socialists, Jews, communists, gays, gypsies, anyone who he didn't believe was supposed to be German. And he believed anyone who did not fit within his perfect sociological identity was not a German citizen and should be outcasted from society.
So these things, they run deep.
Very.
Very, very deep. I guess to finish off with our final question, how is Trump just as corrupt as these people that you've mentioned? How is he using these strategies?
Well, see, with Trump, he is combining strategies used in the past with a modern perspective, more of a 21st century way of seeing things. He's not exactly taking the same playbook they used, but he is modifying that playbook. He's taking it and using it in a 21st century perspective. So, for example, we have many historical evidences of Adolf Hitler calling Jews vermin and poisoning the blood of Germany. Well, we have very similar language used by our president today up to the 2024 election, where he said illegal immigrants, or any immigrants in general, were poisoning the blood of our country and were vermin that need to be exterminated. And like Adolf Hitler talking about any political enemies, he would refer to political opponents or anyone who was any liberals, socialists, communists, centrists, syndicalists, anarchists. He would refer to them as the enemy within that needed to be gotten rid of and purged. So you could see very strong characteristics of an authoritarian mindset with Trump that is very similar to that of Adolf Hitler. Now, when it comes to actual action, you see very similar paramilitary groups that are ran by civilians between, say, Adolf Hitler, Benito Mussolini, and Trump. For example, Adolf Hitler had the SA, which would basically be a civilian paramilitary group that would harass others and eventually would be used to go on to stage the 1923 March on Munich against the Weimar Republic that was meant to overthrow the government. Very similarly, Benito Mussolini had the Italian Fighting Leagues, which was also a civilian paramilitary group which would harass political opponents in the streets and would eventually be used in Benito Mussolini's March on Rome in 1922, which would overthrow the government. Now, very similarly, you see groups like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers be told to stand back and stand by our president right before the 2020 election. And on January 6th, you would see them actually take part in the January 6th insurrection and storming of the Capitol. So there is very large similarities between that in his use of paramilitary groups as compared with fascists of the past.
Now, I've heard a lot of people, not saying I agree with them, but I've heard a lot of people say that Trump had nothing to do with January 6th. What can you say to disprove them?
I would say that his language of election fraud has very much ignited that fateful day, in which both prior to the 2016 election and 2020 election, he would make comments about how if he had lost the election, it would be due to fraud and that rightful Americans would need to restore democracy and would need to restore the rightful place of the president and would need to stand up to fight, essentially. He would very much use language around the word fight. And up to the 2020 election, he would reference election interference a lot and spouted a lot of conspiracies about mail votes and would successfully displace a lot of trust in our election system and how our elections are run and handled, and would cause a lot of people to lose faith that our elections are being handled properly and that every vote is being counted. He would displace a lot of faith by then. And with January 6th happening, he did have a lot of ability to stop it from happening, even while it was going on. We do have evidence that when January 6th protesters had constructed a wooden monument to hang Mike Pence and were chanting outside, "Hang Mike Pence," and that when the Secret Service had evacuated Pence, they had told Trump, and we have documentation that his first words were, "So what?" So it is very telling that even if he didn't ignite it, even if he didn't implicitly start it, he wasn't against it. And we do have evidence of that, considering after he got inaugurated on his second term, he fulfilled one of his campaign promises and pardoned every January 6th insurrector, even the ones who had history of child trafficking, child pornography, as well as assaulting police officers and murder.
Lots of horrible things. Thank you for coming onto my podcast today. Is there anything else you want to finish off with?
Yeah, of course. I think what's important is the fact that we don't great man anyone, in the sense that we don't look at any figure as being so great that they aren't held up to scrutiny. I believe every person, no matter how great of a job they've done, or no matter how many great acts that we think they might have passed, that we apply the same scrutiny to them as everyone else, no matter how great or how horrible the person is. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't do when looking at this current president, because they may not look at the type of language used in the bills that he wants to pass. And they might just pay attention to what he says instead of what he actually does. But I think that's all I have for today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.